So this afternoon we're going to be talking about securing health data and the challenges that it comes with. We've got two speakers who are going to talk to us about the topic, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about it. I think data, any data, can be compromised, and all data is valuable. Health data has a particular nuance to it, and so we need to apply maybe some additional care. I think one of the things that we do see is that health data, if it's in the health industry, becomes quite a different thing. Health data in every sector is relevant, though. So when we look at health data, it exists in probably every organisation because people go on sick leave, they have maternity leave, and so HR systems tend to store health data. So we'll be looking at all the nuances and be talking about that. We've got a Q&A session at the end, and we can talk about it. So my name is David Lello. I'm hosting this session today. I'm from a company called Burning Tree. I am a Chief Information Security Officer and head up the professional services team in Burning Tree. Burning Tree is a security and risk consultancy. We tend to focus in a number of areas, particularly in security transformation, security improvement, and then, of course, identity and access management, which I get rather passionate about because I do like it. But on the security transformation and improvement, we certainly have seen a lot of interesting customers and cases where organizations have needed to protect data and health data specifically, and how their transformational programs need to adapt and change to meet the demands that come with not only regulations but also good common sense and practical security. We have a number of really interesting customers and some interesting case studies in terms of work that we do with those customers. And I think that certainly with some of these customers we've seen some different sort of challenges. So in healthcare type industries where you're talking about hospitals and actual real physical equipment, the challenges become a little bit more interesting because where hospitals maybe have a scanning machine that might be 10 years old on an operating system that shouldn't be around anymore, that isn't necessarily patched to the right level, it becomes a different kind of risk. Compared to when you have a modern HR system that's storing health data around employees and the contrast that you get there. So I think some interesting things that we can certainly talk about this afternoon. In terms of health data and healthcare, I think there's a lot of potential challenges that we can see, and I'm sure you yourselves might have some interesting stories to tell. And so when we get to Q&A, we can look at some questions and debate some of those. I think certainly data sharing is a massive issue and something that needs to be managed within the constraints of the law, but also in using good technologies, good processes to drive out good practices. Making sure that systems have continuity so we don't have failures and downtime, especially where it becomes critical infrastructure. And addressing these things, I think, become really important. Ultimately, all of it comes down to our ability to be able to detect and defend against attacks against that data. So we are going to start with Graham from Proofpoint, who's going to come up and talk to us a little bit about how they're dealing with this. And I'll introduce the second speaker after that.
There we go. Hi, so I'm Graham Moore. I'm going to talk to you about breaking the attack chain in healthcare. And when thinking about putting this talk together, I had to think about what's the impact that we have, myself and my colleagues at Proofpoint. What impact do we really have in healthcare and in cyber attacks and impact in general, really, right? And it led me to think about some other heroes of healthcare. Okay, so First I got up there Amber. Amber's my youngest daughter. So she makes a massive impact every day. She is a dental nurse, right? So people go into her dental surgery, they go in a little bit sheepish, you know, and then they come out and they're full of confidence. They're like, hey, how you doing? Because she's cleaned their teeth, she's fixed them, she's got them looking great. They've got their confidence back, right? She makes a massive impact. Danielle, my eldest daughter, is a dispensing optician. So people go in there, you know, and then they put the glasses on, they're like, hell, yeah, that's great. Look, darling, wow, you're my wife. You're beautiful. You know? My wife is beautiful, I haven't got a slide for that. But, you know, they have a massive impact. They really do. And then I think, what do I do? You know, does it really have an impact? You know, I talk about, hey, we stopped a ransomware attack and we saved the company tens of hundreds of thousands of euros. Yeah, we all know that, right? Ransomware attacks cost a lot of money. We want to save organisations money. So then I started to think about, what about our adversaries? What do they do? What impact do they have? Okay. It's not a good impact. I can tell you that for sure. So then when researching this, I found, what's the impact on actual individuals? So there was an attack on the Irish healthcare executive that I'm sure you're all aware of, okay? And the impact there was pretty devastating. It caused widespread alarm within the healthcare executive, so much so that they ended up having to shut down the entire Irish healthcare system because they needed to contain the spread of the threat. And they also needed time to work out what to do next. But I'll tell you what the real impact was. For this lady, Donna Marie Cullen, she tweeted that the impact of this cyber attack, okay, she got a call at lunchtime to say that she would not be getting her final radiation treatment. Now, Donna Marie suffers from a sarcoma, a really rare form of aggressive brain cancer. So this cyber attack stopped her treatment going ahead. So that's the impact on individuals. Now this attack on the Irish healthcare actually resulted in the leakage of 520 patients' private healthcare data, but it actually affected 32,000 patients in terms of missed appointments and absolute chaos, okay? So let's have a look at the attack. It all started with a fish. We say it at Proofpoint all the time. The number one attack vector is still email. You need good email security. Well, here what the attackers did, and it was a group called Wizard Spider. They love to give themselves these fancy names. They sent a phishing email on the 16th of March. It was opened by a user on the 18th of March, and it contained an Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet had hidden downloaders, Trojan horses, keyloggers, etc. in it, and they got installed on a device in the network. Now, the attacker was able to operate in the network for 8 weeks undetected. Okay? Now, they take their time, these attackers, right? They want the crown jewels. So I think if you remember back to, I think it was Paul who did the keynote speech, he said, people need to be careful that they don't just try and stop attacks, that they actually recognise that you might well get compromised. You probably will get compromised, and you need to be resilient. That's what he said. In the keynote, he said, you need to be resilient. You need to be able to survive an attack, okay? And here, in this particular attack, the resilience didn't quite seem to be there. They were able to move laterally. They had 8 weeks to move laterally. What do I mean by that? They moved from machine to machine, from identity to identity, because the identity that they originally broke into is not the one they want. They want to go after an identity that maybe has a leftover password, that has admin rights, that hasn't been changed, that's been forgotten about, because then they can up their privileges. And when they up their privileges, they're going to use something like DC Sync, and sync themselves like they're a domain controller. And if they do that, they get all of the passwords out of Active Directory. They literally can take the company over, okay? This is the type of devastation that they can cause. So then, they decided that they'd got the crown jewels. They started encrypting data. And once they'd encrypted that data, they often go on to destroy backups. They want their ransomware to be taken seriously. And if they've encrypted your data, stole it, and then destroyed the backups, they know that they're going to get your attention. So then they deployed the Conti ransomware, okay? By the way, to move laterally, they used an off-the-shelf tool called Cobalt Strike. It's pretty straightforward, right? These tools are pretty easy to come by. And if you thought that multi-factor authentication would have fixed the phishing, well, Evil Proxy is a shelfware that can get around multi-factor authentication. We all thought multi-factor authentication was like the silver bullet to phishing. It is no longer. People can easily get around this with shelfware. So we know what the impact is, right? We know that it's going to be the disclosure of information, patient information, in this case 520 patient records on the dark web. We know it's damage to the brand of the healthcare executive and the hospitals. We know it's financial loss through paying a ransomware. But what is the impact really? Well, let's go back to Donna Marie and see what she says. So she said the impact to her was the worry that even if there was a minute chance of a crumb of this cancer left in her head, that it would multiply and it would change her whole radiation plan. It would all need to be revised. She was literally sitting at home worrying that this thing's still growing in her head. That's what these attackers do. That's the impact they have. Okay? So we need to stop it. So attackers or adversaries are standardizing on these attacks, right? They've got them crafted and honed now. They're using a mix of different things, but what you'll see is that mostly, and you've seen it in some of the slides and some of the other talks today, mostly it's human-centric. They target people and they require people to initiate the attack for them. That's click a link, open an attachment, to do something, to fall for a social engineered attack. Okay? They are also recognising, attackers are recognising they can easily get around MFA, multi-factor authentication. It's no longer the silver bullet. They've got tools to do that. They can gather credentials stored in caches, browser cache, you know, other places. They've got the tools to do that. Mimikatz, things like that. They're very easy to run off the shelf to harvest credentials that get left lying around. They want to do that lateral movement with tools like Cobalt Strike because they want to get to the account that has the data, the crown jewels. And then we know what comes after that. So attackers are standardizing on their attacks. Now we also see some new stuff coming out, right? Toad attacks. Proofpoint are brilliant at acronyms, by the way. Toad attacks is telephone-oriented attack delivery. They're very clever, they're cunning. So with this attack, what they do is they email in an email with no malicious URL or attachment, so it's bound to fly straight through the secure email gateways and other solutions. It gets into the user's mailbox, and it will be something around, you know, a help desk request, you know. Hey, we need to update your virus on your computer, call the help desk, whatever. And they ask the victim to ring a telephone number. You ring the number, you get through. They'll even have an automated hold, you know. They make it sound really believable and professional, so it'll be like, thanks for calling the help desk. You're next in the queue. Your call will be answered in approximately 1 minute, you know. And then you get through, and you get through to a human, and they direct you to a website. Oh, don't give us your personal details. You know, that wouldn't be secure. Just go to the website, click up here, download this document, you can fill in your information, and of course in the background it's installing all sorts of stuff on their laptop, right? So that's the way they do it. Toad, we're seeing a lot of these Toad attacks on the rise. New ways for attackers to exploit organisations. But again, still human-centric, targeting people. So breaking the attack chain then, we need to break the links in the people-centric attack chain. So we know that these attacks are going to flood through the door in the form of credential phishing and malware. Most attacks start over email. I think it's about 94% of all attacks begin over email. 70-odd% of ransomware attacks began over email. Okay, but we also need to take care on some other accounts as well, on some other parts, like a cloud account takeover. When they do a phishing attack, they're likely to get into your cloud account, which means they have access to legitimate file shares. They have access to your shared SharePoint drive. They have access to a lot of data. So we need cloud account protection, but we also need supplier protection. Supplier compromise is a really big thing. What you'll see these days is attackers often don't target the organisation that they are actually going after. They'll target a supplier of that organisation. Why? Because they recognise that smaller suppliers probably don't have the money to spend on sophisticated security solutions. So they find them an easier target to break into, and then once they're in your supply chain, they can start to communicate with you and ask for invoices to be paid, and they can swap out the details of the bank accounts and so on, and you'll end up with supply chain fraud. Once they're in there, we talked a lot today in some of the sessions about, what happens if someone gets in? You need to be resilient. Well, they are going to try to move laterally. They are going to try to manipulate and exfiltrate data. So we also need to be looking at data exfiltration. And you can see along the top there, all of these are very much people-centric problems. If you look at the data exfiltration problem, data does not grow legs and leave the building. People move it. So when we're looking at DLP, data loss prevention, we should be looking at it from a people-centric position. We shouldn't be looking at it from a, let's go classify all my data and spend months or years trying to work out whether this document is sensitive or not. We should be looking at people. What are they doing with our data? Where are they getting data from? Why are they taking it from there and moving it to over there? What's their intent? What's the context behind what they're doing? So these are all people-centric security problems. Now, if we look at the trends for 2024-25, Gartner say the rise of AI is going to be a big problem. We all anticipate that, right? We know it's a bit of a double-edged sword, though. AI is going to be used by attackers to create more sophisticated phishing campaigns and at scale. But equally, Proofpoint will be using AI to be able to better defend. So that's a bit of a double-edged sword, that one. Digital transformation, as we know, has been going on a long time, but it is continuing to spread and increase the attack surface. But most importantly is social engineering. The increased innovation of social engineering attacks. These are the types of attacks that fly straight through Microsoft O365. They will end up in your mailbox. There is nothing malicious in these emails. They are very cleverly worded, crafted emails that always have a sense of authority and urgency to them. They always appear to come from your boss, telling you to do something immediately, okay, and tricking you into doing something. And these cause risk across the entire attack chain. You can see there the attack chain, the reconnaissance, the initial compromise. Persistence. We saw that in the healthcare executive attack, right? They maintained persistence in the environment for 8 weeks, gathering of information, escalating privileges, staging their ransomware, and then boom, the impact comes. And we saw earlier when Alistair was talking about the data breach, Verizon data breach report suggests that 74% of data breaches have a human element to them, right? They're exploiting people. So let's look back at that attack and let's see what we could have done had we have been in there to stop that attack. And this is what every organisation should be doing, right? So to start with, it was a phishing email, if you recall. Well, if you have really good advanced email security, then hopefully we can stop that attack ever making it into the user's mailbox. But even if it does make it into the user's mailbox, every organisation should be training their users with security awareness training. There was a very good talk earlier by USecure on, how to deploy a security awareness training process. What you need is a platform to be able to automate that training, okay? We need to be able to test our users. We need to be able to send them simulated phishing emails, but simulated phishing emails that really, really are real world. What we do is we take real world attacks and we de-weaponize them, and then we use them as simulations. So they have the real logos of the organizations on there. So a fake O365 login page, a fake reset your team's password, that sort of stuff. And then we can try out and make sure our users are resilient, and then we can make sure that they are a last line of defense. They're not going to fall for these attacks. They're more likely to report the messages as suspicious. We could also break the attack chain at the cloud account. We could understand that, hey, someone's logging into this O365 account, but this person usually logs in from a Mac in Kent. So why are they logging in from a Windows machine in, I don't know, France, right? It's too fast to travel, so we can lock that out. We could also use browser isolation. For those users that click on links and don't take any time to think about it, we could isolate them and put them in a ring-fenced browser so that we can control their browsing. We can stop them having the ability to key in their username and password, and we can stop them having the ability to upload and download data to the web, so they can't impact themselves. Identity threat detection and response tools could be used to make sure you're resilient, so that if somebody does get in, that we're looking to see what's going on the network. We can deploy deception services. We talked about those credentials that linger around. Someone logs in and their password gets cached in their browser. And you can run tools off the shelf like Mimikatz to be able to harvest those cached credentials. Well, how about if we stuff those browsers full of deception credentials as well? The likelihood is that the attacker is going to be extremely unlikely to pick the legitimate credentials. They're going to pick at least one or more deception credentials as well, which will trigger alarm bells off in our SOC that we have an attacker inside our network. We don't have to wait 8 weeks to find that out. We can find it out on day one. Within minutes or hours, we can find out someone's inside the network, and we can start to take action to remediate it. Enterprise DLP solutions to make sure that data doesn't leave the organization, okay? Insider threat management. Don't think that always attacks are from external sources. Your own people are sometimes your biggest risk. There are people within your organization that may well want to be taking data to their next job that they're going to. Okay, so let me give you an example. This is a good example on the screen now of very many places where that particular attack that we talked about earlier could have been stopped. It could have been killed off earlier, and we would not have had the devastation of hospitals being closed and cancer appointments being missed, okay? But when we talk about the DLP incident I just mentioned, let's see another real-world example here. So intellectual property is key for a lot of organizations, none more so than Pfizer. Everybody knows about Pfizer's intellectual property because you've probably got a shot of it in your arm. COVID, right? The COVID injection is in your arm. But for Guy Delp, he was a little bit concerned. He's a CISO at Pfizer. He was a little bit concerned because he had a bit of an incident going on with 12,000 documents being downloaded from a very secure cloud share by somebody who had authority to do it. It raised alarm bells going. But what he was very concerned about is that he does not accuse an employee of stealing data because, as he said to us, you don't get to be wrong. You can't accuse an employee of stealing data and then find out their account had been compromised by an external attacker. But you need visibility to know what's going on to be able to do that. So, as he said there, Proofpoint allows us to walk through what exactly a user was doing. Everything they were doing. And in this case, he's glad we did. because we were able to tell him that 12,000 files had been downloaded from a cloud share, and the lady in question had downloaded Google Personal Drive and was about to start uploading them to her personal Google account. Now, this could be catastrophic for Pfizer. This is a loss of 12,000 COVID IP-related documents. Guess what? She had a job with a Chinese pharmaceutical company and had already handed her notice in, was about to be leaving Pfizer. Okay? So this is the type of technology you need in order to be able to break the attack chain in healthcare. You need comprehensive cybersecurity solutions that work across the entire attack chain. And then hopefully then we can stop these types of devastating attacks. And I'll end on a good bit of news. Donna Marie is cancer-free. She beat it. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Really interesting in bringing the human element into it. I think it's important for us to remember that there are people on the other end of that data stream. It's not just a computer that we need to protect. So thanks for that. Wayne from Simile. Sorry, Wayne.
So just want to quickly start off and say thanks for your attention and the time that you're sharing with us. You've heard, hopefully through the day, a number of presentations from various points of view on cybersecurity. It's important to us all. We have a slightly different point of view. It's not the human element, it's what is going on your network. I was interested in the stat that was provided earlier, 74% is human. I think at the end of the day, it's all human. We create our own problems. So what is the problem that we see is in IoT, IOMT. We heard a little bit of OT earlier. People getting quite animated about being left out, I think, was the general feeling. And the challenge is we are creative. We're always thinking about better ways to do things. In doing those things better, there are some elements that we miss out because we don't get the full information that we need. We create beautiful things. And while I'm thinking of IoT, I'm thinking of hand dryers. I'm from Zimbabwe, and it just made me smile when we had manufacturers of hand dryers made by Europeans that only recognize light skin. It was super interesting. So the scope of what we're up to. And this is the challenge. We bring these into our corporate environments. We don't know what's there. I mean, I don't know how many of you are actually in the industry, but you speak to anybody who runs a network. Their first answer to the question of how many assets do you have in the network is some figure, and they know it. That's not the case. Unfortunately, it's not the case. We've got early anomaly detection. There's many of the vendors here that you've heard speak very eloquently about anomaly detection. We too have a piece to play there. And it's difficult to define, measure, and reduce. And just think about what I said earlier about our creativity. I was at a show at the beginning of the week where there was this wonderful new VR invention for doctors to go and scan people's heads. Sounds fantastic. Those of us who sit on the security side are starting to see red flags all over the place. And we'll run through and we'll see why. I think a common thread from speaking to many people today, the lack of staff to do what you need to do in a network. Third-party risk. We touched on a little bit with Proofpoint in the presentation. What do you do when you see actually third-party solutions running in your network? You know they run in your network, but they're doing malicious things. We had a great example beginning of last year of exactly that, a hack that came in from a trusted solution by a non-trusted user. So our device sprawl is just going mental. I mentioned the VR headsets for healthcare. We're seeing it in our homes. We've got smart light bulbs that we can turn on from continents away. So it's brought right into our every existence. Cameras, air conditioning units, lighting systems, Aircon systems. I was speaking to a gentleman earlier about just a simple aircon system that was in their system that was causing all sorts of issues. The extent of the problem, we used to have lovely little diagrams on what a network looked like. That's quite neat. For those of you who run networks and know what they actually look like, know that that's very, very neat. There's no doctors externally that are remoting in. There's no jagged lines with devices within the network, especially when we think MT, OT, calling out. How do we measure that? How do we do an efficient job of making that secure? Ireland had its own healthcare incident. I think everybody knows a lot about it, and more of it was shared today, which is fantastic. These stats here are all stats from well-known organizations on what it actually costs organizations when they are intruded. How many attacks are actually happening? We're most of the time oblivious to what's going on if we've got good security in the way. If we've not, we're an open target. We have the ability to allow people to run free within our networks. We know that specifically within healthcare, despite all of our ideas of it's a very lucrative industry and they've got lots of margin to play with what they do, they don't. Statistically, they're on about a 5% margin. So any breach within healthcare is an expensive breach. I used an example earlier today, and I just want you to all stop and think about it. Doctors, a doctor in one particular network we were running a proof of concept on, drove his electric vehicle into the parking, plugged it in, connected his vehicle to the corporate network. These are things that we need to be aware of, that you wouldn't ordinarily think of. So, frameworks are put in place to make us do a better job, all of us. We're all responsible. Every breach is due to a human. Some humans are more prone to it, and there are solutions to sort them out so they don't just see a nice link and click it and download it and say, hey boss, I've done this. Critical infrastructure, critical national infrastructure is one of them. We've got NIS2, we've got DORA, we've got lots of compliances out there. They all have the basic same premise. First of all, you need to understand what's in your network. As I said earlier, most people think they know until they find out that they don't know. And that happens on the IT side, less so on the OT side. And the IoT side, it happens a lot. It happens a hell of a lot. So once you've got an identification of your assets, your cameras, your door systems, what do you do with it? It's great. We've got all of this information now. We know what's in our network. You have to understand the vulnerabilities that come along with the compliance that's tied to it, the best practices that are given out by the vendor. Can you go and remediate it? In healthcare, you can't just go to a machine and decide to update whatever it needs updating just because a third-party package said that you should. Imagine going to a Siemens and telling them your MRI scanner, its OS is rubbish. It's full of security holes. They're going to say, well, update it. That wonderful warranty that you've got on your $500,000, pound, euro, whatever currency it is, machine is going to be invalidated. And if you push that patch, I don't know, you might have frequencies that the human body won't be able to sustain. So once you've got all of that information, you can decide what you're going to do. Now, some organizations will look at cybersecurity as a whole, and they'll say, well, you know what, it's acceptable risk. We'll take it on our insurance premiums. Something else lots of people don't think about. The insurance premium that comes along with not being protected and not having the ability to show that you're compliant with DORA or NIS or any of these other compliances that go on. You don't have a track record of showing what you're doing, what your best practices are to close the gaps in your network. And that's the last piece. What are you doing to optimize your network? So with what Assembly look to do is we look at three elements. Three elements that we believe are particularly important. You've got to know what's in your network. You have to know it. You have to know it on a daily basis. It's not good enough to have a quarterly scan. I know there's organizations out there that do that, and there's those that offer the service. It should be a backup service. It shouldn't be the key thing. Your network is dynamic. It's busy changing all the time. We have people with mobile phones walking in and out. We have laptops. We have the human element looking to click on all sorts of pieces with all sorts of wondrous new toys they've gathered at shows like this. So you have to know what's there. You have to know what you're compliant with. The inventory alone in healthcare, I mentioned MRI scanners. That's a very expensive bit of equipment. How do you know that it's been utilized correctly? You don't. So you need a solution in place to make sure that you're getting the value of that investment. It's pretty simple. Each scanner has a job. Each department in the hospital will go in and they'll log in as a user, and guess what? If they're doing thoraxes, they're going to be doing a lot of them, you hope. If there's the CT scanners, are they doing enough jobs? Are they making your investment worthwhile? And that's just a small part of the asset management. The efficient management. So I've been in vulnerability management for a little while now with a number of vendors, both IT, OT, and now Assembly, which is IoT, IOMT. I should say that M is medical, in case anybody was wondering. When I first joined the company, I thought it might be military, which I was set straight on. But all of these technologies, you see the first bullet point there on accuracy. They'll give you a list of vulnerabilities from highly critical all the way to informational, which is great information. Wonderful to have. You have to do something about it. That's what all of these solutions are there for. What do you do about it is the key piece. So the way that we look at it is we want to gather all of those vulnerabilities and make them relevant and check that they are relevant to your network with, I'm not going to say AI, I have said AI, our proprietary engine in the background, because I don't want to get stuck in the marketing piece of AI and whatever comes next after it. And we'll bubble up what's important to the network, your IPs, your assets. Because what's the point in having information on a CVE that's highly critical that has no relevance on your network? That saves time, which is our major commodity. We've only got a certain amount of time, all of us, here, and then it saves money. Money's secondary in my book. Past that, what do you do when you have an incident? And I think that there's some interesting technologies here today, and I hope you've had time to have a look at them, that look at what happens after the fact. What happens when there is an organization that doesn't have a solution like Proofpoint in place that's going to be ahead of the curve. So should that happen, we have the ability to look at a network, snapshot it at a certain place, and roll everything back to that point, which is important because healthcare, OT, again, time is money. If you're not getting scans done, if you're not seeing patients, you're losing money. You've got 5%, as I was saying earlier, in healthcare as the rough margin. In operational technology, you have one machine go down, you're losing millions. It could be millions. It could be the break of your organization. And that's bringing me swiftly to the end of my presentation. I kept it nice and short. I hope that all gave you some value. If there's any questions, I believe we've got a question and answer session now.
Wayne, thanks very much. That was really good. It particularly reminds me also with the network. The networks these days are exponential with cloud, and as we see organizations, healthcare organizations adopting SaaS and cloud-based solutions, data flows from those IoT and OT machines out, and what actually happens with that data. We actually had a incident with a customer not too long ago where their SaaS provider was taken down with a ransomware virus, and as it turned out, the core SaaS system was absolutely safe and secure. What had happened is they took a data extract from the SaaS system to run a payroll. That was what was compromised. The payroll and sitting in a file server. And so when we start looking at data and how it actually flows across the network, through the network, from a scanner to a place where it gets stored, where it gets reported, where it gets managed, what is happening with the data flows, what is happening with the data lineage, and how do we actually protect that supply? So really, really good. Thank you. So we've got some time for some questions. You're welcome to ask either or both the same question. First one at the back there.
Yeah, that was really good. I really liked both presentations. Quick question about, I suppose, your thoughts on at home now. I suppose people are working from home a lot more. They're using their home networks. Their home networks aren't being secured by teams working on things and making them secure. What are your thoughts on, I suppose, that as becoming a further vector now for compromising a corporate machine when it's at home and then getting onto the network that way? What are the thoughts around protection of that as organizations?
Yep. So yeah, that's a good point. We find we're now in a hybrid work from home environment, right? So we need to be careful, with what's happening out there. So what we've seen is a big rise in interest in insider threat management. You think about like a bank, for instance, during the pandemic, a lot of workers that would previously be in a very open plan office environment, working next to their colleagues, door access systems registering their attendance, and every time they leave, there's CCTV in there, the printer's in the middle of the office. Suddenly, and these are people maybe doing mortgage broker applications, they're accessing financial information, suddenly they're working from home. So this was a real headache for a lot of large financial organisations. So a lot of them came to us and said, what do we do about that? We need to be a little bit mindful here that we've got workers that, we trust them, but to a point, right? And now they're working at home, and we need to be mindful of what's going on there. So insider threat management solutions became very key during that time because they wanted visibility on what people are doing. And I think this is where, we really see a big change in the way, if you look at legacy DLP systems, they were looking at data. Let's classify my data. What we're looking at here now is, hang on, we need to be careful with our people, all right? We need to understand what people are doing. It's not always malicious. The biggest threat is actually negligence. People are working at home and they want to get their job done. And often they'll download tools to get their job done quicker. There's lots of applications you can download and put in your Microsoft 365 account that will organise your calendar, for instance. But these are tools that are potentially dangerous. They overshare your calendar and your contacts, right? Are they printing documents off when we don't want them to print certain documents off? And these are exactly the areas where insider threat management can monitor the behaviour of your users and check, are they doing something that's negligent? Should we need to give them some more training and stop that being able to happen? A classic as well is, they're using their device, but if they're working from home, they need to be able to do certain things like access their own personal webmail. That's a challenge because they're getting emailed all sorts of things, but we want to give them access to it. We don't want to be, authoritarian and say, slapped wrist, you can't access your email at lunchtime. But what we could do is use things like browser isolation technology, where if they go to Gmail, they go through our browser isolation so that when they click on something in their email, instead of it downloading that document, it actually just opens it for them to view it only, but it never really exists on their machine. It looks like it does, but it doesn't. So they can't actually accidentally install something malicious on their machine. They're the types of things that people have really had to think about with working from home. Bring your own device, that type of stuff. is really a big area where a lot of these technologies like browser isolation can really play a big part in that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
The other thing that I was thinking as a part answer to that is that you've got scanners out there that are busy looking through your connections. 9 times out of 10 when you're joining a corporate network, you're going in through a VPN. So that endpoint has got a certain amount of rigor based on whether it's got an agent-based technology on there, whether it's joining the network and being scanned on joining. So there are methodologies in place, making sure that there's a decent patch cycle going on, that the machines are always up to date with whatever they are running, whatever version that they are running. That's corporate software. There's a crossover with personal stuff. You could argue that the Wi-Fi access points are a little bit weak because they're not corporate, but then you're relying on your VPN. So it should give you should give an organization a fair amount of rigor.
Well, Wayne, it's an interesting one though, because when we sort of talk about the network, I think the perimeter of the network, like from the Jericho Forum back in the day, has disappeared because it is in the home, it is in the cloud, it is all over the place. So wherever you are with whatever device you have, and however you are accessing information, you're extending the network out. So how much do you feel that zero trust and those sort of capabilities come into play to actually be able to drive the idea of trust within the context of accessing data?
I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The basis is get something in place. Start doing your groundwork, because an organization that's easy to get into is going to be the organization that is taken down. It's that simple. I always put it to, and you see it more and more frequently around, you put it to 2 vehicles parked side by side. One, let's say Range Rovers, and sorry to anybody who owns a Range Rover, but they're on the list. If you've got 2 parked side by side, and a criminal has an order to get a Range Rover, if one's got a steering lock on it, guess which one they're going for? They're going for the one without the steering lock. It's simple. So if we apply that to everything that we do, and we look to increase our levels in every element of security, we're going to be in a much better place.
Absolutely. And I think implicitly one of the other things is training, it's education. It's helping people to understand what their obligations, what they should be doing, how they should be behaving in their home with corporate information. Okay. Any other questions? Hold on a sec, this microphone's coming.
It might be a very simple question, but at what stage is something connected to your computer out of the remit in terms of security? So somebody has, like say, headphones. Is that deemed not an issue? So say, for example, a USB key could have files, could be malicious, etc. Because I'm sure in healthcare, but my business, there's lots and lots of things connected to computers that are relatively dumb.
So USBs are I think there's lots of solutions out there to scan a USB before you plug it in. And it is one of those things. We're talking about it right now. It's training. So make your users aware that just plugging something in to your laptop, your own laptop, which has the USB device drivers all enabled. If it's a corporate one, in a lot of cases, they'll be locked down to, I know mine's locked down, I'm not allowed to use it. Maybe I'm one of those users that's on the list. Oh, he clicks everything. No, so I think that's it. And it's an interesting question. Where does it stop? If there's a vulnerability on some wireless headphones that you can use to then get access to the laptop, that then gives you a pathway through to the corporate, I guess the corporate's going to be responsible for it. Thankfully, I'm not aware of any today, but it is something that's interesting. So we've just kicked off a proof of concept on a financial organization. And forgive me for the moment, but it is not looking at the IT that it knows about. It's got a whole bunch of ATMs scattered through 50 countries, and their question is, are the keyboards, are the cameras, and are the screens secure? So it kind of leans into what you're talking about there, and they're looking at that right now. Cameras, we know. I mean, there's plenty of market evidence that cameras need to be locked down, IP cameras. Keyboards, there's ways around it. Card readers, unfortunately, you can use that as a pathway. Again, more for the human element that's putting it in there than the other way. But then we're busy looking at items like that. Anything to add on that?
I think from a data perspective, the company owns the data, right? And if you give them a laptop and they take it home, that's a company laptop. So it is fair to be monitoring that data, and it's very fair to be able to pop a pop-up on the screen when somebody tries to copy something to USB to say this is not a corporate sanctioned function, and to stop them being able to do it. We can be a bit more polite about that sometimes. We can just pop a box up that says please select a justification for your action below, and it will say, that this is sensitive data. You're copying it to a USB stick, and then they get to select. Yes, I have the authority to do this as part of my job role, or I can click the radial button that says I don't believe this data is sensitive and it won't cause a harm to the company, or they can click the radial button that says custom justification, and they can type in their own response. But what you'll find often is that people will hit cancel instead and won't do it. So you can be quite prescriptive about it. We could literally block that and say no one can copy anything to USB. But I think at the end of the day, when people connect stuff to a corporate device, that device is a corporate device. So whether the thing they're connecting to is personal, well, you're connecting a personal thing to a corporate device, it becomes corporate responsibility. And therefore, I think it's fair to say that inside of threat management, monitoring software on that laptop should be able to monitor it. Yeah.
I think one of the fascinating breaches that I saw a while ago was somebody had taken a dedicated USB was used to take files, scans from an OT or SCADA system to remove those files and then go and put them in a server or another part of the organization. And the person who did this on a daily basis decided to use that to go and on their personal laptop to download photos of their kids to go and get them printed at the store. Deleted all the files and then carried on the next day, and it introduced a virus into the system. And it's not just about the controls that we apply, but it's the education that we enforce, and making sure that people understand the consequence of doing things like that becomes so important in terms of driving good practice and good behaviours.
Yeah, from an education point of view, you've got to bear in mind that if you have a data breach of any kind, or any kind of cybersecurity incident, GDPR are going to look at it, right? You're going to have a regulator look at it. What's important is to be able to prove to that regulator that you took proactive steps to protect yourself, to make yourself resilient, okay? Now, it's not so much about whether you had a data breach and what data was lost that is going to get you a large fine. That large fine will come to you because of whether you actually did any proactive steps. So what we see is people that are interested in deploying security awareness training are usually organisations that are highly regulated, so definitely in healthcare, because there's a lot of compliance and regulations required within healthcare, financial institutions, etc. But they're really buying security awareness training to firstly do the right thing, which is to teach their users about cybersecurity, educate them, make them more resilient, make them less likely to be manipulated and part of an attack, and instead enlist them as a last line of defence, so they report suspicious behaviour instead of actually click on it. But then there's also the point that if you can then show the GDPR Council that you actually deployed security awareness training and you train your users regularly, that fine is going to be massively reduced. Okay. The other point is around cybersecurity insurance. You'll find now that cybersecurity insurance becomes very expensive if you don't train your users, or you may, depending on the industry you're in healthcare, this is probably going to be the case, that they'll deny you the insurance altogether. So it's a bit like a house alarm. If you've got a house alarm, your house insurance is cheaper. Okay? If you train your users, expect your premium for cybersecurity insurance to be reduced. Okay? Because every organisation that is touching personal data ought to be training their users to be more resilient and to understand cybersecurity. So security awareness training is really a must-have in healthcare.
We're out of time for more questions, but you're very welcome to approach us afterwards or find Graham and Wayne down on the floor, have a chat to them, and thank you very much for your attention this afternoon.